Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Hoffman-Baniak, and I'm CEO of the Greater San Fernando Valley Chamber. And we are doing a ballot prop forum today because we've had a lot of questions on some of the ballot props, especially like the Indian gaming, because there's two. It's a little confusing. We don't do these very often. Some of you probably remember we did one a few years ago in person when there was a lot of initiatives on the ballot and people were confused by them. So our board as a chamber, our government affairs committee looks at the initiatives. They decide what initiatives relate to our business community. And then we take a position, like, whether we are going to say yay or nay to it. And then we send out something to our members saying, take this to the polls, and we kind of give you a suggestion on how to vote. And our board, we normally go through everything. We already have taken positions on a couple of these initiatives based on one is, and Tino will tell you later, it has been on this ballot several times. The other one was one that a bunch of chambers and the Cal Chamber got together on. We actually, it's pretty bipartisan, and Tino will talk about Prop 30 as well. And then we'll have a couple city initiatives. And I think, Stuart, do we have a county one that I'm missing? Is there a county one we need to talk about?
There's the county one on the sheriff.
So we may hear a little bit about that. So today we have with us Tino Rossi from Swing Strategies, who's going to do the main presentation, and I'll highlight him. And then we have Stuart Waldman from VICA, who's also going to talk about some of the local issues. But Stuart or VICA and Swing Strategies are all working on a couple of the city initiatives that you're going to hear about as well. But we're going to start with the state ones, I believe, and I'm going to, and Tino, if you want to share the screen, it's set up for you to do that, and I'm going to spotlight you for everyone.
All right. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's certainly always wonderful to spend some time in the morning with the folks from the Valley. As Nancy said, my name is Tino Rossi. I work for Swing Strategies. We're a public relations firm up here in Sacramento, and we love ballot measures. I think that's the most simple way to sum up our mission statement. And so today we've got a little short presentation we want to walk you through that outlines what's on the ballot, who's supporting, who's opposing the various ballot measures, give you a little preview of what you can expect to see as voter contact ramps up with only 52 days till the election here, and then maybe tease just a little bit the fact that there's some pretty high profile things already headed to the 2024 ballot. So as you'll see on the screen right now, I've got up what we call the money slide. If you want an overview of all the propositions, these are them. You'll see there are 7 ballot measures that you'll be asked to vote on this year's statewide general election ballot. And if you've been paying attention to the last few cycles, it's actually the least amount of ballot measures that have appeared on a statewide ballot since 2014. And if everyone remembers, 2014 was Governor Jerry Brown's reelect campaign against Neel Kashkari. Interestingly enough, in the last 15 years, 2014 was also the low watermark for turnout. As you can imagine, a non-presidential gubernatorial general is the 3rd of the 4th least turnout elections, with a primary non-gubernatorial or presidential non-gubernatorial election. So it'll be interesting. Without really a lot of competitive races at the top of the ticket, do ballot measures drive turnout? We tend not to think so. So are we headed for another lower turnout, a lower ballot measure election? It remains to be seen. So as you'll see on the screen, there are a few different things mainly related to sports wagering, tax increases. We've got things related to healthcare, whether that's on the reproductive side or the dialysis side, and then a referendum we'll talk a little bit about. Before we get started, and did that change screens? Did that change the slide? Thumbs up from someone if they saw it change slides.
Yes, it changed.
So a little something I like to talk about before we get into it. Obviously, the Sacramento legislature is largely single party run. And what we always find interesting when we analyze the ballot measures is, why do so many people go to the ballot box? Well, as we see oftentimes through the ballot box, the electorate could be a little less progressive than the legislature. In fact, in 2020, the California Republican Party took positions on 11 ballot measures. The California Democratic Party took positions on the same 11 ballot measures, and voters actually sided with the CRP 7 out of 11 times and the CDP 4 out of 11 times. So you can see there's some appetite from the business community, the labor community, some other communities that sometimes when they can't convince the legislature to do something or agree with them, going to the ballot box can be far more favorable. In fact, several times over the last 3 cycles, we've seen direct rebukes of legislative policies by the electorate. Twice voters have rejected rent control, but in 2018, the legislature passed rent control. Twice in the last 2 cycles, voters have failed a referendum or enacted a referendum, both on cash bail and others. And so we just continually see over and over again a little bit of a disconnect between the legislature and the electorate. So we're tracking this year to see if that trend continues. As you can see, the California Dem Party seems to say yes, please, to most of the proposals on the ballot, where the California Republican Party seems to say no, thank you to most of the measures on the ballot. So it'll be interesting to see how this breaks down. All right, next slide here. Let's get into the first one, Proposition 1. As many of you know, several months ago, the Supreme Court re-examined Roe v. Wade and reopened the door to states to legislate around reproductive freedom and reproductive health. California, being a leader in the pro-choice movement and long having really recognized the right to choice, is seeking to codify their existing policies into the Constitution. Really, this becomes a discussion around privacy. That is actually the constitutional portion that this covers, is the right to choose or refuse contraceptive and the right to receive an abortion. This was placed on the ballot by the legislature, the only measure we have this year that the legislature passed and put on the ballot. And you may be wondering, well, hey, how come the first one is Prop 1 and then we bounce to Prop 26? Well, I mentioned a little earlier that there may be some concerns around turnout. Knowing that, according to PPIC, almost 70% of California voters support the right to an abortion and to choose or refuse contraceptive, the legislature wanted to put this at the very, very top of the ticket in the hopes that it would drive voter engagement. We're going to see this cycle. Obviously, in support is Planned Parenthood affiliates of California, the League of Women Voters, the California Medical Association. Also, leadership in the legislature. Speaker Rendon has a ballot measure committee open. I think it'll be interesting to see what role he takes on this measure and whether or not he spends any of his money out of that to help pass this. You'll see only $2 million has been spent to support it so far. Why such a low amount? They didn't have to collect signatures. That's a huge advantage of putting something on the ballot through the legislature. You avoid one of the most costly parts of a ballot measure campaign, and that's signature gathering. Opponents of this, Catholic Conference of Bishops, the California Alliance of Pregnancy Care, and the Interfaith-Based Coalition. So, I think we're getting some feedback.
Okay, someone needs to mute themselves.
No, I'm like.
So I think what you're going to see here is a coalition come together that really talks about 2 things, late-term abortions and taxpayer subsidization of this. So that's going to be the narrative and the dialogue you see going back and forth. So that's Prop 1. All right, moving on. This is the big fight of the fall. This is the main event, if you will. And I'll try and spare you 100 sports wagering puns, but I will say, if I were a betting man, I would say each of you has already seen some advertising related to sports wagering. Before we dive into the 2 proposals, a little background on how California got to this point. In 2018, the Supreme Court lifted the federal prohibition on sports wagering. They said, you know what, sports wagering is more of a state's decision and we shouldn't federally outlaw it. Since then, 30 states have legalized some form of sports wagering, either through the ballot box or the legislature. But as you can imagine, the big fish still out there is California, with some analysts anticipating that the sports wagering market here in California could be between $3 billion and $9 billion a year. Making it no surprise, there's a whole host of folks trying to get their hands on the exclusive right to be the purveyors of sports wagering. The first attempt at legalizing sports wagering here in California comes to us via Prop 26. Prop 26 actually started collecting signatures way back in 2019 in the hopes of appearing on the 2020 ballot. Actually, a fun little story about Proposition 26. They were collecting signatures in the middle of the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit and folks stopped going out and collecting signatures, they actually sued in court asking for an extension. The extension was granted. They continued to collect signatures, but by the time they finished in their time frame, it was too late to appear on the 2020 ballot. That's why it was put on the 2022 ballot. And in fact, that lawsuit was the lawsuit precedence that was used for the proponents of a Gavin Newsom recall to receive an extension on their signature. So sometimes I like to joke that this sports wagering thing also led to that kind of election we tried to have last summer. The proponents of this measure is a small coalition of Indian tribes here in California. There are about 110 federally recognized tribes in California. 29 of them are supporting this measure, and they think the best way to authorize sports wagering in the state is to allow it only in person at tribal casinos or 4 of the state's licensed horse tracks. Meaning, if this weekend you want to go bet on the Rams, shoot, I forget who the Rams are playing this weekend. I think they're 4.5. That's right. Yep. If you want to bet on them to cover the spread, you'd have to drive to a casino or go to one of the 4 licensed racetracks and actually bet in person. 10% of the bets only placed at horse racetracks would be taxed, and that money would be sent to the general fund. The LAO thinks that's in the low tens of millions. All the bets placed at the casinos would not be subject to a tax. You say that seems like a pretty thoughtful proposal. Why would anyone oppose that? There is a coalition of local labor, business organizations, and others that are opposing the measure because deep down in there, there's a little PAGA-like provision that actually gives the proponents of this measure the authority to sue local card rooms over the games they're playing.
Tino, really quick, can you do 2 things? Because I got some questions in the chat. 1, explain what PAGA is. 2, let people know what a yes vote or no vote means on the propositions, because people find the wording confusing. Thanks.
You got it. So when I say PAGA-like, many of you are probably very familiar with the Private Attorneys General Act. This act actually authorizes private citizens to use the powers of the Attorney General to bring forth disputes over the labor code. So many of our small business friends have unfortunately fallen victim to these PAGA-like frivolous lawsuits where there's disputes over pay stubs or paychecks. And instead of working through the Department of Justice and the Labor Division and the Attorney General, they passed the Private Attorneys General Act, which allowed private citizens to individually bring these suits forward and then litigate them out in court. This follows a very similar model where instead of folks who believe there are gaming establishments doing something wrong, having to go to the Attorney General and the Gambling Control Commission and prove that there's wrongdoing, they can instead just open a lawsuit, litigate it out in court. So it kind of circumvents, in the opponent's mind, circumvents the judicial and regulatory process. And the card rooms and the local governments and the folks they service locally are very concerned this will be used to shut them out of business and essentially eliminate competition. I think that's why you see groups like the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Black Chamber of Commerce, LA BizFed, I know the chamber's a member of, has opposed this measure, not because they don't think tribal casinos should be the purveyors of sports wagering. They're just concerned about that one little provision that would allow them to attack jobs and attack local revenue. So a yes vote on this measure would authorize in-person sports wagering only at one of the state's 68 compacted tribal casinos or one of the 4 licensed horse racetracks, one of which is Santa Anita in LA. A no vote would not authorize new types of gaming, including sports wagering, and would instead return California to the current status quo, which is no legalized sports wagering. So that's Prop 26, the in-person measure. Proposition 27, which again, I'm sure all of you have seen advertisements on up to this point, would authorize mobile sports wagering. Now, instead of going to bet the Rams to cover on the Falcons at an in-person tribal casino, you can just open up your phone, open up your laptop, open up your iPad and bet on the game right from the comfort and pleasure of your own home. This, as you can imagine, is sponsored by online gaming operators, organizations like FanDuel, DraftKings, BetCaesar, large internet gaming companies that have sort of spread this model throughout the United States now want the permission to do it in California. I will say there is a even tinier coalition of tribes that are in support of Prop 27. In fact, I mentioned 29 of 110 are supporting Prop 26. Only 3 tribes are supporting Proposition 27, and that's because the measure says in order for these online companies to operate in California, they have to partner with the local tribe. Well, you would think that would curry the favor of tribes in California. Not so fast. The largest coalition of tribes engaged in sports wagering is a coalition of more than 60 Native American tribes that are all opposed to Prop 27. They believe through the measures passed in 1998 and 2008 that Californians have promised them exclusivity to certain types of gaming here in California, and authorizing Prop 27 is a threat to their self-sufficiency and their sovereignty. Simply put, if you can bet from the comfort of your own home, you don't really have too many reasons to drive out to a tribal casino. That very much concerns the opponents of this measure. And that's why those 50 plus California Indian tribes, the NAACP California and Cal Asian Chamber, have opposed. Now you may say, well, why is Darrell Steinberg, a mayor of Sacramento, supporting a yes on 27 position? What you're going to see in all the advertising is that this measure is a solution to homelessness and mental health. I mentioned on Prop 26, only bets placed at a racetrack are taxed. All bets placed under Proposition 27 are subject to a 10% tax, with 85% of that tax being earmarked for solutions to homelessness and 15% being earmarked to solutions for mental health. The LAO estimates that's anywhere between $500 and $800 million. So a yes vote on this measure authorizes online or mobile gaming, generating roughly $500 to $800 million. That will be used to fund homelessness and mental health solutions. A no vote shoots down mobile and online sports wagering, and again returns us back to the status quo, which is California has no sports wagering. Now, I know the next question that comes. What happens if both measures pass? I think the easiest answer to what happens if both measures pass is that there are a lot of lawyers that are going to make a lot of money. And I say that because there's huge disagreement between the Prop 26 and the Prop 27 team on if they can coexist. The proponents of Proposition 27 say they could totally coexist. If both pass, there's online gaming and there's in-person gaming. The proponents of Prop 26 don't agree with that assessment, so it would likely get litigated in court. Usually, if there are two ballot measures on the same subject that are competing, the one who gets the highest total vote number, even if it's just by one vote, becomes the prevailing policy. So lots of stuff to track here. I think the thing I'll close with on sports wagering is if you think back to 2020, we had Proposition 22 sponsored by Uber and Lyft. It was the most expensive ballot measure fight in California history at $225 million. This has already shattered that and will continue to shatter it. My guess is they'll spend between the two campaigns somewhere between $400 and $550 million. And honestly, the result could be that nothing changes. So very fascinating discussion to watch there. All right, Proposition 28, funding allocation for arts and music. This is sponsored by someone you all are very familiar with, LAUSD, former LAUSD Superintendent Austin Buettner. I believe he was also the deputy mayor for Antonio Villaraigosa when he was the mayor of Los Angeles. He's now stepped out of that role and is looking to dedicate 1% of our state's general fund to specifically fund arts and music programs in K through 12 education. As many of you know, we have Prop 98 currently that mandates that 40% of California's spending has to be spent on K through 12 education. I want to be clear, this 1% is in addition to Prop 98 funding. So now 41% of our budget would be directed toward arts and music. It's a very popular measure among voters and among some of the most famous Californians. Groups, Dr. Dre, Pearl Jam, lots of musicians and artists are supporting this measure to revive and revamp the arts and music program in our school systems. And interestingly enough, this does not happen very often, but it did happen this year. There's no formal opponent to this measure. So when you get your voter information guide in the mail with your ballot, and you usually read the arguments for and the argument against, on Prop 28, there's going to be a big old blank that says no argument submitted in opposition to Prop 28. That likely gives them a pretty easy pass. And what I think is interesting is to watch what Austin Buettner does on this campaign. For those of you that remember, back before Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor, he had a series of ballot measures called Arnie's After School All-Stars. And he really used the ballot measure to up his name ID, associate him with political office. And so is Austin doing something similar here? I have no inside information, just some speculation to see if maybe he's interested in something else. So again, a yes vote earmarks 1% of our state's general fund to be spent on arts and music. A no vote leaves money unallocated in the budget for arts and music. I mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger on the last slide, so I think it's only appropriate I start this slide with one of his most famous lines, "I'll be back." And that's exactly what the proponents of Prop 29 have been saying for the last 3 cycles. I'll be back, because stop me if you've heard this before. SEIU UHW has put a measure on the ballot that would essentially put the camel's nose in the tent of starting to unionize dialysis clinics. This was on the ballot in 2018. Voters rejected it overwhelmingly. This was on the ballot in 2020. Voters rejected it overwhelmingly. That is because there's usually a very well-funded campaign from dialysis providers and a coalition of dialysis patients who argue if this ballot measure passes, it'll increase administrative costs, which ultimately will lead to a more expensive, less quality healthcare experience for dialysis patients. I think, again, another thing to analyze here, you see the supporters are SEIU UHW. You folks in LA are no stranger to the fact that SEIU has really, sort of owned the fact that they like the ballot measure process. I think at last count, they might have had 10 to 15 minimum wage initiatives around LA that deal with something similar to this. And now they're back at the statewide ballot box. So no strangers to the ballot initiative process. But again, it's tough to go to voters 3 times and expect a different result. Opponents of this, as you can imagine, California Medical Association, California Chamber of Commerce, and the California Taxpayer Protection Committee. You can see there's already some pretty heavy spending on both sides. A yes vote on this, again, allows SEIU UHW to increase their oversight and participation in dialysis clinics. A no vote allows dialysis clinics to continue operating the way that they have. Proposition 30, income tax increase for EV subsidies. One of my favorite ballot measures on the ballot, and we'll talk a little bit why here in a second, but what's the measure do? The measure would increase income taxes by 1.75% on single or joint filers over $2 million. It then takes that new tax revenue, about $4.5 billion, and puts it into a pot of money that should be used to fund electric vehicle and charging station subsidies. The proponent of this measure is a company we talked a little bit about earlier for their role in the 2020 election, and that's the rideshare company Lyft. Well, you may say, well, why does Lyft want to fund electric vehicle infrastructure? Well, the California Air Resource Board has given all rideshare companies a mandate that by 2030, 90% of their fleet has to be electric. Lyft looked around the state and said, we don't have enough electric vehicles and we don't have enough charging. So they're asking voters to help tax high income earners to fund this infrastructure and to make it easier for them to make that transition. Also, on top of funding some electric vehicle subsidies and infrastructure, they take about 15% of the new revenue and dedicate it to wildfire prevention. So that's why you see the California State Firefighters, American Lung Association, and the California Democratic Party supporting it. Well, the California Democratic Party supporting it, and they're always on the same page with all of their leaders. Well, not on this one. Fascinatingly enough, Governor Gavin Newsom just launched a series of TV ads this week opposing Proposition 30, calling it a cynical scheme by one corporation to divert personal income tax. And you look at who he's on a list with, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Everyone take a screenshot. I think that might be one of the only times you see John Capal and Gavin Newsom on the same coalition list. But he does truly believe this is an attempt by one company to divert personal income tax revenue, so he is opposing it. This is a fascinating one to watch, given that you have CTA and Governor Gavin Newsom on the opposite side of firefighters and the CDP. I think it's going to be a very, very close election. Folks are very sensitive to the EV discussion right now, given gas prices. But as we know in California, we are leaders on climate policy, and this would be a first of its kind tax increase to fund that infrastructure. So a yes vote raises taxes by $4.5 billion to fund EV infrastructure and subsidies, and also dedicate some revenue to firefighters to help fight wildfires. A no vote rejects the tax increase and leaves the personal income tax bracket the way it is currently. All right, last one. Proposition 31, flavored tobacco ban. I talked a little bit about the fact that voters oftentimes are in conflict with the policies of the legislature at the ballot box. This will be put to the test test this year on one of the most polarizing issues we have in California. In 2020, Senator Hill passed a flavored tobacco and flavored harm reduction product ban, saying any flavored tobacco products or any flavored products that are meant to transition folks off of smokers are no longer legal in California. Well, quickly after that bill passed, manufacturers of these products qualified a referendum, which would undo that law and has put a pause on that law until it's voted on this November. As you can imagine, Michael Bloomberg, who has funded these types of initiatives around the country, has put in the initial money to help support the referendum. American Heart Association, NAACP, California, all in support, and opponents include the Hispanic Chamber, Chamber of Commerce, Central Valley BizFed, and in their arguments in the voter information guide, they talk about the impact to small and minority retailers. They talk about the fact that you already have to be 21 to buy these products. So is prohibition really the answer? And you may say, well, wait a minute, you said the referendum was put on the ballot to undo the law. Why are the folks who want a flavored tobacco ban supporting it? Remember, on referendums, this is where it gets confusing. It is essentially a direct vote of the electorate on the policy. So a yes vote keeps the ban in place, meaning if you want to see flavored tobacco and flavored harm reduction products banned from being sold at all in California, you're a yes vote. If you don't like that the legislature banned these products, you're going to vote no on their policy. This is always a really confusing question for voters because they think, well, if someone put a referendum on and I'm in favor of the referendum, I'd vote yes. That's where it gets tricky. And honestly, the most famous example of this is probably back in 2018, where the gas tax was on the ballot and lots of folks thought they were voting yes to repeal the gas tax, when in fact the no vote was to repeal it. Quickly, and then I'll wrap up. I said that that's a historically low year, only 7 measures on the ballot. We've already got 3 measures that are eligible for the 2024 ballot, 2 that are verifying signatures now, and a whole host of other ones we fully expect to make a run at the ballot, meaning it will not be long before we're back at 10, 11, 12 ballot measures. We've got another tax increase by an early Facebook investor. I think that one's got a good chance to be negotiated off, given the legislature's made it pretty clear they're willing to fund these programs without going to the ballot. Joe Sandberg tried to qualify for this ballot, an $18 minimum wage. In fact, he missed putting it on the ballot by 1 day, 1 single day. He missed putting it on the ballot, so it's moved to 2024. We'll see if that stays on. $18 minimum wage in 2024 might not be that attractive. And then third, I mentioned PAGA a little earlier. There is a measure that's already eligible, for the ballot that would repeal certain portions of PAGA and reform PAGA. And then I mentioned, just to make things a little more confusing, there's actually another sports wagering measure that submitted signatures to appear on the 2024 ballot by the San Manuel Mission Band of Indians that would authorize in-person and online wagering. And then finally, taxpayer protection. This measure is somewhere, some form, come to you a couple of times over the last 30 years. This would require that all new taxes passed by the legislature receive a vote of the people before being enacted, and it would restore the 2/3 threshold requirement for local tax increases, even the ones placed on the ballot by signature gathering. So sorry, Nancy, if I went a little long. That's the update. I encourage all of you, you can head to caballotinitiativeupdate.com. We send out periodical ballot measure updates. We track this stuff like crazy. Like I said, we're obsessed with it. And if you ever want one of these presentations for a different organization, we're happy to do it. So with that, I will clock out and take a deep breath before I suck all the oxygen out of my office. Oh, I think you're on mute, Nancy.
Yeah, I am. So if anyone has any questions on the state ballot initiatives, let's do those before we move on to the local issues. And Scott, yes, this will be available. A couple housekeeping things. We will make this available. It'll be on our YouTube channel. Scott, I could probably send it to you directly. Scott's from the Oceanside Chamber, Tino, so he may want
Excellent. Hey, Scott.
We, after this meeting, our government affairs committee, our board is going to discuss the ballot measures that we haven't already discussed at our last meeting. So if you're here from the board or government affairs, you could stay after, it'd be great. And if you're from another chamber and want to be part of that conversation because you're going to have it with your board, you're welcome to stay with us as well. We do have 2 city ballot measures, ULA and SP. And I know that Stuart and Tino are both here to talk about them. And I mentioned earlier that Stuart's from VICA, so I'm going to give you guys the floor to talk about those 2 ballot measures. And that's for the city of LA. So for those of you that do not live in the city of LA, like I live in Santa Clarita and Cindy lives like Moore Park, this doesn't pertain to us. So you may not see it on your ballot, but the chamber represents the San Fernando Valley. So we'll definitely be on the ballot.
I'm happy to let Tino.
Yes,
get
please
the ball
do,
rolling.
Stuart. You're the expert locally. I defer to you.
Oh, I was going to defer to you. So ULA is being treated as a tax the rich measure, which is what they're calling it. They're saying it will tax mansions valued at $2 million or more. The problem with that, it's a document transfer tax that will apply to all transactions, residential, commercial. So it just adds a lot of costs to it. And one of my board's big complaints on it was that it does nothing to solve the problem of homelessness or affordable housing. 75% of the money is supposed to go towards affordable housing. Right now they are paying $900,000 to build a unit of affordable housing, where a private developer can build a unit for between $300,000 and $500,000. So it doesn't rein in costs; it increases costs. And one of our big complaints is that we have $1.2 billion that we approved, we being the voters in LA, approved with HHH and Measure H, and that to date has only built 300 beds. So this is funding a problem that we already have money going towards. So I know Tino will talk about the tax aspect of it, but we just don't feel it's needed, and quite frankly, we don't trust government right now. So just giving them more money doesn't actually solve the problem.
Yeah, I would echo everything Stuart said. We have huge concerns about how, this council has spent these funds in the past. And so that's a big concern. And I think if we just strip away everything else and look at the fact that we're facing 9% inflation, it's very expensive to live and do business in the city of LA. And any tax at this time that's going to make it more expensive on renters, small businesses, or homeowners to compete and afford the cost of living in LA is a bad policy proposal, especially given the things that Stuart outlined, which is voters have already authorized historic funding in this department. City council needs to prove that they can be better stewards of those resources. And we're really concerned mostly about whether or not this actually solves the problem, which our conclusion has been it won't, given the limited number of units at the high price tag that this money would go towards building. I will say what's interesting about ULA, and I mentioned this a little bit in the statewide ballot measure process, the signatures were gathered by citizens. This wasn't placed on the ballot by the city council. In 2018, the courts ruled on what's called the Upland loophole decision, where it says if citizens gathered the signatures and placed something on the ballot, it only requires a majority vote. So while most of you are probably used to the 2/3 threshold of tax increases at the local level, especially tax increases that are special in nature, meaning they have a specific funding designation, this one is not that case. So if we want to see this one fail, we've got to push it underneath 50%, much taller task.
Okay, so what's a yes and no vote mean on this one?
A yes vote would tax certain properties over $2 million. There's a little bracketed 4.5%, 5.5%, generating roughly $800 million to fund a new bureaucracy to oversee the development of affordable or homelessness housing. And a no vote would not institute what would be close to the largest tax increase in city history.
You want to go now?
You want to go now.
Okay. And then SP is a parks tax. It is a parcel tax that kind of came out at the last minute. We saw it a couple of weeks before they voted on it. No one had reached out to anyone in the community or the business community to discuss it. While we normally would oppose another parcel tax, VICA has been known to support taxes like Measure M. When we knew what we were getting, we were part of the discussion, making sure that the valley is well taken care of. That didn't happen here, and so that pretty angered a lot of my members at the time when we took our position, we did not have the list of projects, and we weren't part of the discussion again of what those projects really should be. The argument for this tax has been that it's just replacing a tax that's set to expire in a few years, which is true. It's Prop K, which was a county measure.
Hi, Esther.
So you can assume that the county is also
I'm
going
good. How are
to
you?
try and replace that tax as well. The city's just trying to get a jump on it. But the fact is there is time, and we did ask the council before voting on it to delay this for the next election cycle.
Wait, Stuart, I think I accidentally muted you. Sorry, I was trying to unmute someone else.
You've been trying to mute me for 26 years now.
That was the first time I was
You found the button. So, you know, again, we asked that they delay it and work with the business community and other folks to come up with not only how much, but also what the money would be used for. So,
you know, and I just want to chime in. The last few years, we have not supported any parcel taxes because they've been just lumping on top of one another, like stacking discount codes, but stacking taxes.
Mhm.
And if you did the math and added up all the parcel taxes we're paying for and not necessarily getting a return on it, some of them haven't even been enacted for what they were for. The chamber's kind of taken a step back. That doesn't mean yes or no in this one. We still look at them all individually, but the math hasn't been panning out the last few years.
And that's why the coalition I'm representing today is specifically opposed. In the past, we've seen, in fact, LA voters are not always super excited to authorize parcel taxes. In 2020, I think Measure EE was placed on the ballot to help fund education. Voters rejected that. There are very few things folks agree on across the state. One of them is that Prop 13 is still good, generally speaking. And we believe this is an end run around Prop 13 and a way to raise property taxes in spite of the fact that voters are guaranteed stability and certainty on their property taxes. So that's our concern as a coalition. And when you combine ULA and SP together and you look at the totality of them, that's a total of 1.1 billion in new taxes that LA City is going to be asked to authorize. And again, if we look at inflation at 9.1%, the cost of living, the cost of doing business, it just doesn't seem like the right time to authorize a $1.1 billion property tax increase, which would be combined the largest property taxes increase in city history.